ready when you are.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah,
Okay, perfect. So, Adam, you are passionate about creating cultures where people thrive. Can you share a fun team event or a moment that left a lasting impact on you?
absolutely. So lots of team events we've done that have been fun. Things like boat cruise or what are those rooms called where you escape rooms.
Escape.
Lots of fun things. But actually the thing that really comes to mind for me is I created this process where we would do internal QBRs where we would bring the team together for once a quarter and take a couple of days and say no distractions, set your out of office. And we would focus on important industry things and training, things like that. But the meat of our time together was to take time and say, all right, let's talk about all the things that are working well, what's going really well. And we do sessions to gather that feedback. And then after we start with the positive, we would go into now, which things are a real challenge for you right now? And we'd ask for feedback and they'd, bring in those challenges. Then we'd have them rate those things that are most challenging and things that we think we can make an impact on. And so we get our list of 3, and then we'd say, okay, let's instead of just, this is not a complaining session. Let's go after it. Let's see what we can do to make it better. And, put on your owner hat. How would you solve this problem? And we would prioritize and work on solutions to those problems and come out with real next steps, the things that we could own, and even divvy up some of those responsibilities and how we could move those issues forward. And I'll tell you, all the fun stuff and the doing things together to build memories, those are great and needed. But the things that really made an impact into people's lives was when they got an opportunity to take ownership over some of their own future and making their situations, their lives better.
Was it hard to manage those type of in-person events during the COVID? How did you mitigate this thing during the pandemic environment? And
Absolutely.
how did you transition it now?
Yeah. So yes, during the pandemic, we had to do those types of activities virtually. There was one interesting one that we did that involved a scavenger hunt, where we had to go around the house and find items and all that, do silly games. They still worked. We still got to working on solutions, working on the most important things. It's not the same when you're not in person, but certainly it does help, and it does still help build trust with your team members and really work on the important things you need to work on. Since then, we have gotten back to in-person events, though it seems like budgets are a little lighter than they used to be. So it's been more regional events instead of bringing the whole team together for one big event, which I think is still can be really good.
That's a good compromise, I would say. I want to start from the very beginning, and I want to ask you, in the early stages of joining a new SaaS company, how do you prioritize which customer success metrics to focus on?
Yeah, great question. In an early SaaS business, you're dealing with a lot of scarcity in all sorts of ways. Scarcity in data, scarcity in resources, time, people to be able to tackle those problems. So I think at those different stages, you got to look at what's going to make our customers successful and what is important for us to keep the lights on in the business. And once you understand the eventual goals of where you need to get to, then you can trace back to, okay, here's what's most important at the moment. There's no question the foundations are true no matter what stage you're in, that you've got to have customers getting value early in the process, and you've got to get them to renew and expand over time. question is, how do you focus on that, right? And early stage, those strategies are so much different than later stage. But I would say it's, in the earlier stage, there's so many heroics you have to go through to understand what develop processes, one-off things you have to figure out to make customers successful. But then it has to become, how do you scale those things and not make it time intensive to get a customer to find value and repeat it and then eventually succeed in your software and your solution. But how can you take those learnings and apply them to a scalable process and really make the whole team successful, to make your customers successful?
Speaking of different companies, different sizes, different stages, how does the 30, 60, 90-day plan differ when transitioning from a startup to a hyper growth phase?
Yeah, and when you say 30, 60-day plan, are you talking about for a new leader coming into the company?
For the new leader, yeah.
Yeah. When I think about an early stage versus a later stage, more mature organization, a 30, 60, 90-day plan for an early stage company is really just, you've got a playbook that you can pull from of these are the customer success activities that should exist within an organization. Let's look at, do we understand churn? Do we understand how our customers derive value? Do we understand CSAT and NPS, feedback that we're getting from our customers? Do we have playbooks in place and are our processes written out and understandable for all the different teams and individuals that you're working with? And so I would say 30, 60, 90 days is like 30 days learn, 60 days is strategize and figure out what it is you need to put into place, and then 90 days is your deploy and develop that next year's plan of, this is what we need to go after in this coming year. What's very different about a more mature organization is you're likely going to see that they've got most of those things already implemented. The stuff they likely understand at least well enough what's going on with their customers, and they've probably got some good documentation and understand customer feedback. Then it's more a question of what do we first of all, what are we missing that maybe we haven't looked at yet, and then the learn part of that 30, 60, 90-day plan becomes maybe a little more intensive and a little more involved. You're pulling in stakeholders from all over the place. You're spending more time with customers saying, okay, we understand what has been done in the past. What do you think is missing? And how do you perceive the activities that we engage in with you and with others? But then it becomes, one of the things I've heard a great leader say is there's typically a moment, a really important moment within every customer where the lights turn on for them. And as in more mature organizations, they may have lots of data points that point to usage and there's customer sentiment and all this stuff. But a lot of times people don't understand what that magical moment is where the lights really turn on for a customer. And so getting the team to help you understand, and getting the customer to help you understand, this is the point at which everything clicked and we realized the value that we could get through your solution, and we were able to go from walking to running. And if you can figure out that is the same in multiple customers, and you can find that moment and figure out how to make that moment repeatable and train your team on how to make that moment repeatable, and make sure you've got the right systems in place and the right people in place, and the rest of the organization is backing your team to really go after that moment and capitalize on the most important things, then you can build really great processes around that and scale that out so that it's a win-win for everybody.
What's that one thing you wish more SaaS companies would do within the first 90 days of a customer's life cycle?
I think that, those first 90 days are so crucial to the ongoing piece, that your renewal is mostly decided within that first 90 days.
Is it? Is it?
I think so. Yeah. Because what happens in that first 90 days is you maybe, depending on how complex the solution is, not everyone is implemented or live at that point, not necessarily receiving the value that you expected to, but that should absolutely be the goal in the first 90 days is nail the first use case. And, some very complex platforms, they have one use case and it takes, a year to implement. That's a little bit different. I'll maybe push that one to the side. But even for those, in your first 90 days, you have to make quick wins, because if you're not showing the customer that the ultimate value to them is what's of highest importance, and we're going to move mountains to make sure that you're getting that value early and often within our relationship, then you're not setting yourself up for success for that renewal and beyond. If it's a 1-year renewal, at 90 days, you should already have value. And you should be looking at what's the next area of value we're going to generate for your organization, so that by the time you get to that 1 year, they're already starting to see that ROI that they expected, and then you have a roadmap for deeper value and higher ROI over time. I think that's hands down, that has to be highest priority. And you could have a long roadmap to deep value, but you've got to have a short roadmap to quick value, and there's got to be quick wins that begin the flywheel within the organization.
Speaking about value, and also about, the product, they are called aha moments. How do you make sure that you nail that value, and how do you find the real one, not necessarily the one that is sometimes disclosed in the first onboarding? Usually I find it that it's one thing they say, but there are actually other things that are important. And while you might have different stakeholders for your solution, that value might differ from stakeholder to stakeholder, and you only have, I don't know, as you mentioned, 90 days. So you have a very short period of time of making an impact. How do you nail that value?
Well, first of all, I think that we can't shortcut the sales process, because I've been the recipient of clients that maybe because the customer was ready to buy, salesperson said, "Okay, I'll get out of your way, and you want to buy it? Yeah. Why would I ever stop you to question anything?" And you get those customers that had an expectation that was founded on assumption, where they thought it was going to look a certain way based on what they read on your website or whatever. And we didn't spend the time to really qualify the value that they expected, and to talk to the right stakeholders within the organization to make sure that they were all on board and on the same page. So I think that a good sales team is going to say, "Great, we're going to help you purchase this thing that you want to purchase. Before we get moving, let's just also make sure we get all the right stakeholders in a room, and make sure that they understand how much value we can drive within your organization, and also what's going to be required of you in order to get there." It's harder to get a salesperson to be excited about that. I think if that's not clear in the sales process, then there's got to be a quick understanding that comes right away, where we all set the right expectations internally and externally, that we say, okay, in order for this to be successful, these are the people within your organization that we need to speak to right away, not later, but now. And then as a part of that, we've got to be educating them and not assuming that they already understand what is required of them, and what our solution is going to to bring to their environment, and how that value is going to come. So that's a big piece of it. But once you've gotten to, I would say in the first 90 days is not the right time for this, but as you're maybe halfway or into your renewal cycle, you should be having a very frank conversation with the economic buyer, the person who's going to be responsible for getting this renewal approved within the organization. We as customer success team members are often hesitant to ask the question, how do you justify this platform to your finance team? What are the metrics that you report on to be able to say, I need to keep this tool, this platform, I need to keep funding this within my organization? And I think we're afraid to ask the question because sometimes we're afraid of what the answer is going to be. But I'll tell you, better to find out halfway through the renewal cycle that maybe we're not hitting those metrics, and find out what it is they care about as far as value back to the organization early, so that we can actually orient around that thing and then uncover more areas of value for their organization, so that we're not speaking our language. Hey, this is the value that our customers typically see, but we're speaking their language. When you said this was important, we were able to put things into place to be able to get you the value that you expected from our platform.
And when you deal with, I would say, different needs or different expectations, what I usually see when implementing even a CSP solution, because I'm close to that part, usually the CS teams do want to use the tool, but they have a hard time in convincing their manager that in order for them to be effective, productive, you name it, the tool is a must-have, and it's not a nice-to-have.
Yes.
And it's basically, who do you sell the tool? Do you sell it? And what values are important? What use case is it important? Is it to the manager who is basically not using it on a day-to-day basis, or is it to the team that is using it and they are seeing value, but most probably not necessarily the value the manager is expecting?
Yes.
And I find it, I wouldn't say contradictory, but it's
Sure.
it's a conflict. Who do you
Yes.
solve first?
That's a great question. So I've worked for two decent size software firms. The first one was Smartsheet, and I got there when we had 170 people in the company, only 6 CSMs, and worked there for 5 years. We went public during that time, 1,500 people, from 170 to 1,500 people in 5 years.
That's what I call scaling, I think.
Yeah, that's hyper growth. And then the second one was MavenLink, which became Cantata. That organization had maybe 30 CSMs when I got there, and the company was about 250, somewhere around there, and then scaled past 500 people, and over maybe 60 or 70 CS team members at the end of that time. Those two organizations, I mentioned the size, but the more important thing to your question was the sort of solution that we had. So at Smartsheet, it very much appealed to the masses, and it was the boots on the ground, that the person doing the work who usually found the platform, and they would say, hey, there's a ton of value here. Let's start using this. And they'd build a coalition, get somebody to say yes to the expense, or they'd put it on an expense card and pay for it, out of their own budget. And then we'd eventually have to get to a place where we are helping them sell this solution up to their manager, and eventually from their, manager direct, head of that team to the head of the department. And then IT gets involved, and then IT has to approve of the security aspect of it. And then we get to a place where especially in these large organizations, where we're pushing to get approved and enabled within the whole organization, so that people in other teams can find and buy and acquire licenses to this solution and become a part of it. I'll tell you, that was a very effective strategy to get into so many different organizations at all different levels. It was a very horizontal solution that was usable in different departments. And then every customer was a customer and a prospect, because you may have a small team within that customer, but there's maybe more of that team, and then other teams, other departments that are all potential customers. The challenge we ran into in that environment was scalability of the platform. And horizontal platforms tend to be very nimble and quick to spin up new use cases and to get quick value. But the challenge is the more downstream implications of how is your data organized? Are you going to be able to get the insights out of it where the department heads are going to be able to talk to each other and have information that flows up, through good data governance and all sorts of things, so that you can receive the value for the organization, not just for the individual of the team. The other company that I know this is a long answer to your question, but the other company I worked for.
Keep going. It's very useful. It's a real pain. This is why I'm asking. So I'm curious.
True scenario. Yeah. The other company I worked for was top down, and we would sell to the head of the department, or the head of the company. And they would say, "Hey team, we're going with the solution, implement it." It was the tale of two cities, the tale of two platforms. The one that was built for the boots on the ground, they loved it. And I expected, I'd see tattoos of the logo on people. They loved it. But getting their bosses and their, the department heads to buy in became difficult. On the other side, the bosses loved this other more complex and purpose-built solution, but it was not built as well for the people who had to use it on a day-to-day basis. So the boss wanted the insights they could get out of it, but the people on the ground didn't love using it. It was more cumbersome because of how it was architected in a way that you could get the good insights out of the platform. So I mentioned we struggled getting the bosses on one side to use it, but we struggled on this side getting the individuals to use it and to actually have to put good data into the system so that their bosses could get the right insights that they wanted out of it. So there's a little bit of a chicken or the egg. There's how do you capture both of those audiences in a way that brings the most value? And I would say, if you can have the solution that is built for the decision maker to get the value out of the application, but don't lose sight of the people who have to be in that application on a day-to-day basis, and yes, you've got to get product feedback from the bosses to make sure that you're designing it correctly for the long term. But spend time in user research with the boots on the ground, the person that has to use this thing, so that it doesn't feel like I have to, but it feels like, oh, thank God you're here, because I just want to use this thing because it brings me so much value. So I think that's the key, is build with the end in mind, but bring value every step of the way for the individuals that need to use the platform.
That was for sure a very strong answer, and for sure I'm gonna use it as is, because it definitely helps. I think I'm gonna quote you from especially when you describe this part in our next meeting, where product, sales, and customer success. Now, speaking about teams, Considering you've led teams both in US and abroad, how do you navigate the cultural challenges in customer success? Are
Great
they
question. Yeah, are you saying are there challenges?
are they cultural differences of the way they look at things? Do this thing exist, or is it just a myth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it depends on the market, right? Because I would say you have this interesting challenge between Eastern and Western culture. And I think that's a very there are more stark differences between, say, the collective mentality versus the individual mentality. And I think that those are much more stark differences between, say, there are definitely differences between, say, North America and Europe, and I'd say maybe especially Western Europe. There are differences, but they're more similar in many ways than, I would say, Western Europe and Asia, China, Japan. In these cultures, I'd say more stark differences in the way that those two areas are going to see the way of interacting with customers, the way of challenging authority and providing feedback. So I think that it's important to, if your solution is successful in different markets, you have to have a thread of, these are the things that we do that are the same everywhere. But you also have to make sure that you're making allowances for approaches to customers that meet them at where their culture is coming from. So, and that is going to show itself in the processes that you use with customers. The sorts of meetings. Are you doing more in person, or are you doing more Zoom? Are you doing more formal presentations, or is it more relationship driven? And are you doing more talking about somebody's kids versus their boss and their what's most important to the metrics? Those things, I think we as leaders need to listen to our team members who are living in or are steeped in understanding the culture much more closely. And if we don't have CSMs that are in those different locations, then we've got to be asking our customers those questions. Hey, this is how we typically do it in this other region. How, now that you've been a customer for a little while, how does that resonate with you? Are there better ways that you think that we can approach this sort of situation? Because I think we've got to maintain the core of our market positioning and the value that we bring to businesses, but we have to be able to tailor the message in a way that's gonna really speak to customers in all different cultures.
Now moving from cultural challenges to type of teams. And you've
Yeah.
handled teams that are quota driven and those that are solely focused on customer health. Which structure do you think is more challenging, and why?
In the teams I've been on where they're solely focused on health, what I find is the company tends to see those teams as a cost center, and the revenue generating teams is a revenue center. What I see as a result of that is the cost center teams tend to have a lot of extra things, extra responsibilities that just kind of get shoved on them and become a catch-all for everything, as opposed to the revenue generating teams typically have a much better position to be able to say, hey, that thing you want to bring to us as a team, I see the value, but if we focus on that, you might see less revenue generated as a result of that. Is that a decision you want to make? And most of the leaders who are focused on the revenue that's coming back to the business are going to see that and say, it's important, but it's not that important. So I think that when revenue is an aspect of what the team is able to generate for the business, it's usually a much more intelligent conversation about staffing and about value that the team brings back to the organization. And it helps the whole company really focus well on making customers successful in a way that leads to better value for them, which results in more revenue for us.
When building teams, what's the one common thread you look for? What's that thing that you don't negotiate and the candidate must have it? What's the most important thing when you hire?
I don't think there's one thing. And I think that that's the challenge of customer success is you have to have people who love technology and can talk about it. They don't have to, most companies, they don't have to be engineers, but they have to be able to get excited about technology and really be able to talk about it in a way that gets other people excited. They have to be great with people in a way that helps them become a trusted advisor for their customers as well as internal. It's just a people-centric business. So you got to be really good with people. But those two, I think, are pretty well understood and obvious. The third one, I feel like, is harder to interview for, but you have to, and that's drive. Drive to overcome obstacles, to really not let the customer decide where we're going, but to be able to say, hey, I understand that you think that this is important, but if you're going to be successful, you're going to have to do some of these things that we know make our customers successful, or else, we're going to be having a conversation in 6 months about how the solution's not working for you. And to be able to confidently speak to that and say, no, that's a hard word in customer success, but no, you shouldn't do that. Though it's a combination of those three things that I feel like make a really successful CSM.
What are the most important roles in a CS team that you are building? What are the things with which you cannot make it or break it?
Yeah. In the beginning, you got to have CSMs, and then eventually you got to have somebody that rises from CSM to leader, and has to stop focusing on managing accounts and has to focus on the people. But once you've been doing that for a little while, I think one of the most important things is operations, CS operations. And it's one thing to have sales operations, because companies usually get that pretty early on. Hey, we got to have somebody own our Salesforce instance, or revenue ops, and really understand how the sales team can close deals better. And it's often that organizations, especially in the past, have said, okay, we're going to take some of that team's time to focus on customer success. The challenge there is there's overlap, but especially when the sales team is generating more revenue, guess where the time for that ops team is going to go? It's going to go to the sales team. And now you're left dealing with the scraps of whatever you can get. And so I think that's a vital role that I've seen be very successful in organizations is customer success operations, and getting people who are solely focused on how is this team more quickly getting our clients to value, and how can we give them all the tools they need to be as efficient as possible. AI, customer success platform to make sure the data is all organized well, and then having somebody that is not in the day-to-day actually organizing and administrating those platforms is vital to the success of the team long term.
Speaking about, because you mentioned that initially you followed the sales structure, then you realized that, okay, maybe it's a good thing to have your own and do things a bit different. And then you mentioned something about peer sales with CS? Do you think this is the winning strategy if they basically team up from the beginning of the sales cycle?
Yeah,
Or how do you do? Because we speak a lot about this handover, and basically everyone considers the handover when the sales ends, and then it's no longer my problem. I got the revenue, your problem, no longer in my yard.
I think any organization that doesn't keep a portion of the variable compensation for your sales team, any organization that doesn't tie a piece of that commission to customer staying on till, for a certain period of time is missing something. Because any salesperson that's just focused on getting a customer in the door is going to sell the right solution to the wrong customer. Because the solutions that we build are the right solutions when you have the right customer. And if you sell them to the wrong customer, all you're doing is creating pain for the organization, right? It's eventual churn, and it's a lot of sales and marketing and implementation and customer success time that is just leading to churn at the end, which is bad for our valuation. It's bad for a strain on the business. So we have to be better as organizations at tying long-term success to the initial sale of the customer. That's one piece of it. But the other piece is, does it make sense to have people who are out hunting for new business also stick around, for the long term? And I think that if you tie their compensation to long-term success, you don't necessarily have to have that, but there's something that you gain from being involved with a customer after the sale that helps you be a better salesperson, because you can have an idea of how something might work and talk about it that way in the sales cycle. But when you actually make a promise up here and then see that promise fulfilled or unfulfilled through the life cycle of the customer, that helps a salesperson change their methodology or the way they speak about a problem in the sales process, so that they can be so that we can have more successful customers over time.
You mentioned something of the sales team being a hunter and then being along the journey. Does this mean that you have along the customer journey, do you have to have different type of sales persons? So the person who sells at the beginning and the person who continues the sell, and then the CSM, or how do those combine?
Yeah, that's the challenge, and that's one of those questions that I think there's no right answer to. But I've seen it work both ways. I've seen it so you have people who are out hunting, and then also as an account executive on existing clients, and they're splitting their time between new sales and sales for existing customers. The problem is when you have somebody out hunting new business and farming existing business, is sometimes there's maybe a big new deal that they're really excited about, all hands on deck on. And then you've got a CSM that's like, hey, we got an opportunity. We got an opportunity. And they're like, yeah. I'm focused on the big whale. I'll get to it. And you leave money on the table with your existing customers when you've got a big whale that is pulling the attention of your salesperson. So that's the downside. The plus to having somebody new business and existing business is that if new business is slow, then they can actually focus better on the existing accounts, make their quota, because they're able to pull from two different sources. And if they're doing a good job of farming opportunities or uncovering opportunities in both of those areas, then they can continue to keep the flywheel going in both ways. But I've also seen it work very well where you have a new business salesperson, and then it transitions to the CSM, an account manager, or account executive that is just focused on existing business, existing customers. And I think that works really well when it's done properly, to have a combination of the two. Maybe you have the CSM focused on the revenue of small upsell, cross-sell opportunities and renewals. And then your AE or your account manager is focused more on the larger opportunities within a book of business, and they're tag teaming or dividing and conquering for those opportunities as well. But it does beg the question: do you need both of those roles in post sales, or can the CSM own health and revenue? And that's a question that works well in some organizations and not in others, depending on the solution they're selling, I think.
When do you know that combining health and revenue or under the CSM umbrella is not healthy? Which are the signs that indicate you this part? So how can you take the decision, okay, I need two roles, or I'm good with one?
Yeah. I think it has to do mostly with the complexity of the sale.
Okay.
And what I mean is, if post initial sale, during the customer's life cycle, if you have, say, other modules, adding licenses, things that are fairly simple and don't take a real complex process to sell into organizations, then I think a CSM is going to be, if you can train your CSMs to actually close deals well, and to be a little confrontational at times and actually say you need this if you're going to be successful, then you can have a very successful CS team that closes revenue, and you don't need an account manager. However, if, let's say, you're going to add something that's going to be a 6 to 7 figure add-on, and you've got really, really huge numbers where you're presenting to a procurement team and a finance team and an IT organization, and you need the specific skills that salespeople have, that good salespeople have, that help them navigate very challenging conversations that get very confrontational, and they have to be quick on their feet and to answer the questions that need to be answered, and to avoid the ones that should not be answered, and focus to closing deals, then I think a salesperson is going to be best for that, because the CSMs focus all day on value for clients. And then if they can also spend a portion of their day focusing on closing deals, and it's not too complex, then that's fantastic, and it's good for both. But if it's a complex sales cycle that requires real training and understanding of the procurement process and the complexities of helping a client buy something that they may not understand how to buy, then that's a different skill set that needs focus all day.
I promise that I'm almost there. I know that I didn't necessarily stick to the script, but the conversation was basically led me to those, and I saw an opportunity to basically answer to the things that I am searching for answers. So I was a bit selfish when it comes to this discussion.
Yeah, you should be.
So I wanna discuss about mistakes, because I consider them an important source of learning. We are usually afraid of making mistakes, but I think because we don't make mistakes, we don't develop, we don't grow, we do not learn fast enough. And when it comes to mistakes, I want to ask you, what are the common ones, the common mistakes you've noticed when CSMs try to interpret customer feedback?
That's a great question. And when we talk about customer feedback, customer feedback comes from all different directions. And I think the most easily misinterpreted customer feedback is written, email, Slack, however a customer is interacting, product survey feedback. And that's what I see. That's where I see the most mistakes, is because there's no tone, there's no context. It's just here's a sentence or a small paragraph. And where I see the big mistakes, especially with people who are earlier, CSMs who are earlier on in their careers, is they see a question and they say, I want to answer that question and then move on. And so they'll fire back a response to a customer, and maybe they answered the question, maybe they didn't, but what they definitely missed was the opportunity to understand the context, which may have actually opened up an opportunity for either deeper value and learning for the customer, or maybe even an opportunity for a sale. And we don't have the time for every conversation, for every question that comes in the email, to jump on a phone call and, on a video chat with a customer and talk about it. But that's one of those mistakes that I see CSMs making often, is not backing up from the black and white of a question to say, what's the context? What else should I know that could make this a bigger discussion that would be really helpful for the customer, and actually for me? How do I better understand this customer and how to meet their needs better? So that's a big mistake. And I think it's made oftentimes because people are just afraid. They don't like confrontation. They're afraid of picking up the phone and calling somebody. Our lives are full of interpersonal, not very personal communication, on social media and text messaging, on emails. And, it takes some, what's the word? It takes a little bit of bravery to pick up the phone, or to reach out and say, let's have a live conversation about this. But the best CSMs are the ones who are comfortable doing that and get over the anxiety of people and say, we're doing this.
Staying also on the customer feedback part, because I know that this creates a bit of confrontation between customer success and product. I want to ask you, how do you help your team tell apart the loud shoe from the actual majority feedback?
That's good. One time we had my product team came to me and said, we see all this feedback that gets submitted from the CSMs and from the customers, but there's a lot of noise. So help us prioritize that list of feedback that's coming from customers so that we have actionable insights. So what I did is I created a survey for each of our CS team members and left it very simple, intentionally simple, to say, what are the things that you understand within your customer base are going to drive the most value for your customers? Not just what are they complaining about, but if we were to work on one area of the product that you think would make your customers achieve more value, what would that one thing be? And they only got one. And because we had a big enough team, we could take all that feedback together and look for trends within that. And inevitably one or two things surfaced. And then once we had that, we reached out to the CSMs and said, okay, what are the examples? Which customers are going to get the most value out of these things? Now, it only kind of answers your question, because it could have been the loudest person that they just got off the phone with, that they felt like, oh, that's the most important thing. But of course, we validated that with the customer feedback that was coming in and the volume of feedback. And this is true of customer advisory boards that I've run in the past, as well as internal and external feedback. If you just ask somebody to say, what do you want? You're going to get a feature. But if you say, what value would you like to drive within your organization that you think we can help with, then you're uncovering much deeper solutions. That a feature, that it's my idea of how I might want to solve the value problem that I have. But if you can get somebody to focus on the value and, hey, here's a way that you might solve that value problem, you could find that, there are 20 different people who are looking for the same value and 5 different ways that we could get there. But we could handle all of those through a different avenue to solve the value.
As we bring this interview to a close, I'd like to end it on a reflection. And I wanna ask you, seeing the customer success industry as a whole and where it might be headed, what's your vision for the future of it, and where should upcoming CSMs focus their energy to stay ahead?
Yeah. Well, there's no question that AI is changing the industry, and there's a misunderstanding that AI is going to make it so that we need very little CSM, actual humans, that AI can do most of it. AI is augmenting and helping make the CSM's day more efficient. I think that what people should be focusing on is the human to human interactions and getting better and better at the things that AI will never be able to do. And that's asking the good questions I keep bringing up value in this conversation, because at the end of the day, if that's what's most important, that's value is what drives outcomes with your customers, which leads to revenue and renewals and better customer health, expansions, all that stuff. It has to start with value. And if we train our people or help people understand, CSMs understand that it's in the interpreting data and talking to customers that you uncover the potential value that exists within an account, within a company. That's where all the value, that's where you bring value to your organization and to your customer, is that person to person aspect of how you get there. Then all the AI and all that stuff is just going to help you be more efficient at doing that.
Thank you very much. I feel like it was more than an insightful conversation. So the only thing I can end it with is thank you. And now I'm gonna. I rarely feel like there's no other things that I could end after a discussion, and this was one of those.